Right.
So should I kick it off? Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, good. Yeah, the new co-chair. So I've just been sort of sitting back, sort of named as a co-chair for the administration side of things, and was confirmed, I guess is the word I'll use, by the steering committee last week. So just kind of wanted to introduce myself. I'm Andrea. I work for the Agency of Transportation. I'm the environmental policy manager there. And we're the Agency of Transportation. We're not the lead on resilience things. Certainly we have a large role in resilience and adaptation, and transportation crosses with a lot of other disciplines and people whose focus are on this group. But I just kind of wanted to make sure it's clear that I don't claim to be any sort of expert on resilience and adaptation. I can certainly bring the transportation aspects to this group, but we're all here with different expertise and disciplines and experiences, and so kind of look forward to bringing that all together. And that's really where I will see my role, is sort of playing facilitation, and really just to bring focus to our efforts, and hopefully that we can achieve some beneficial and tangible outcomes. And I think we're at a good point right now, sort of have a new leadership in the group, and look forward to who else might be the co-chair. And I don't know if we have any kind of update on that, Marion, or an idea of the timing for that. Nothing.
I wasn't at the last steering committee meeting, so I'm not the best person to ask. I can check in with Jane, but
yeah, I watched the video of it, and I don't recall there being any discussion on that really. It was more about like still getting everybody oriented to their new roles, and then deciding where they might end up. In what capacity they might want to serve when they end up in the end there. So anyway, that's quick introduction. That's all I wanted to do. And we have our agenda here. I don't know if it's in the chat or if you all have, it's online. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. Really our goal today is to narrow down our recommendations for the response to this House Speaker's letter. Catherine will lead us through that with some exercises and review of the poll results. And then Paula will review our letter. We had a small work group, so we'll review that letter. We'll also, we'll have the public comment on that first part of the recommendations discussion. And then wrap up with next steps in a schedule. Of course, recognizing that we have a rather quick time frame that we're working under to get a response back. So we'll definitely want to try to nail down a schedule for our next steps as well. Is that any changes that are needed to that, or is everybody okay with that agenda? All good? Thumbs up. Thank you. Good. And then the next part really logistically that we have to do is review the minutes from last time. So was it Sue? Yeah, Sue took minutes last time, and I see you're here this time, Sue, hopefully taking minutes this time as well. I'm super appreciative of that. Does anybody have any comments, needed changes to the last meeting's minutes, or can we accept those? Okay, I'm hearing nothing. I say they're accepted. All good? All right.
Extension. I wasn't here at the last meeting.
Okay. Well, hopefully the minutes reflect that too.
Actually, I hadn't been assigned to the committee yet.
Oh, is that
yes,
part
you
of the
had,
process?
David.
Yeah, and I thought, were you not here at the last meeting? I thought
Yeah,
you
this
were.
was like last month, I think, right?
Yeah, it was 11,
Like
11,
the
9.
9th.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were there.
Oops.
Well, the minutes are linked in the agenda, and they're online. So if while we're talking, you look at those and you see anything that we should go back and correct, take the time to do that, and we'll make any corrections that are needed. By the end of the meeting, we'll note those. Okay. But we have a lot to get through. I think this is going to be a pretty robust discussion. Certainly my mind was going all over the place when I was looking through the poll exercise, and have heard some comments from some members just from the working group. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. And I'll just turn it over to Catherine to help lead us through that.
Thanks. And I guess I'll just note that you should have received, in addition, the draft letter that we did have a drafting group that volunteered at the last meeting to start thinking about the, just the framework for the response, not the specific recommendations, but the framework. So you had that in the email from Marion to take a look at. And she also just linked the speaker's original letter to us that we reviewed last week. So as Andrea said, our goal here is to both think about what recommendations we think rise to the top for the legislature's attention. And you'll remember from the letter that so the criteria that the speaker gave us was something that they can address this year. And she had 4 different sort of categories of things she wanted us to think about. When the drafting group got together, we realized that trying to parse all of the actions into these 4 different questions was going to be difficult because there wasn't a lot of, there was in some cases a lot of distinction between them. So we decided that to make our lives a lot easier, we would try to bucket these into 2 categories. And that's part of the task that we took on since the last meeting, which is to go over all of the actions in the rural resilience actions. And I guess Marion has clarified for us that those are the rural resilience actions that are related to building in the built environment, right, Marion? And there are other rural resilience actions that the ecosystems group are.
Yeah, so the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee also included some actions around resilience and adaptation, but for this exercise, we were looking at adaptation and resilience actions related to communities in the built environment, which is what this subcommittee focused on in the county.
And what, this, I think the letter sort of highlighted for our, for the council to address. So the 2 buckets that we arrived at were basically the first one being sort of resources and tools. I think she referenced toolkits, but tools and resources that communities, businesses, and just generally the people of Vermont can use to accelerate their adaptation and resilience. So anything that was, and I will take full responsibility if things seem sort of messy or not quite where they should be. But I tried to sort of keep that as my grounding when I put things into different categories. So things that look like they were specifically targeting, local resources, whether those were, in some cases it could be financial, but in most cases it was various, information that they might need, tools that they might be able to use, ways to assess vulnerability specifically was called out, and make decisions about how to address particularly vulnerable assets. The second category is goes to her second 2 bullets, which were to have us address funding from the federal or state government, priorities for funding for the state and federal government for statewide actions. And then in her last bullet, she also says, and places where there might be need for additional state capacity to address statewide priorities. So we lumped those 2 together. So anything then that as I went through these actions, I thought, well, this is clearly a new state investment, or it calls for federal funding, or it's, a new program that would require more capacity, potentially more capacity. Obviously, I was making some judgment calls there. So if you see something that you think is wildly out of place, we can certainly move it for the final recommendations that we present But it was a good effort just for us to do this initial exercise and make it a little bit more manageable. The other thing that I just wanted to flag before we get into the specifics was that the ones that we pulled out that, as Marion explained in her email to you, that were designated as no action taken or else they were blank, those were given those designations through an exercise that the state agencies went through in September, right? September of this year. So it's fairly recent, but that doesn't mean that there maybe is perhaps some things that where we have thrown them into this category of no action, but in fact, something is happening. So to the extent that particularly the state agency folks see something that you know that is already moving forward, please let us know. We don't want to, in the recommendations, to put forward things that we know are already, on the boilerplate and ready to go. So that's my other request as we go through this. Thanks very much for all of you who did take the poll. We didn't give you much time, and it was, a fair amount to read, but hopefully you felt pretty familiar with the content, at least. It just did require some thought about, how you would prioritize these. So I sent out this morning, you check your email if you haven't, early this morning, an Excel spreadsheet that gives you the results. And I tried to put sort of a bar graph to that spreadsheet so that you could more visually capture the things that rose to the top. And I'm happy to share my screen and just show what that looks like. Let's see. And you'll see I have over here another spreadsheet that with those actions, because I couldn't put all those words into the spreadsheet. So we're gonna have to do a little cross-referencing here as we talk through them. So this is what I would like to propose for our conversation. I thought it would be helpful if, one, we just sort of take a moment to look at the ones that received the most votes or yeses, the ones that people thought were the most important. See if there's anything there that you are surprised by. In the first group, category 1, which was, again, a reminder, state tools and resources for communities, businesses, and Vermonters, that there was a pretty big drop off. You'll see in the votes. We had a number that had 8. Those seem like pretty clear winners. The next had 7 votes. The next grouping had 7 votes. Whoops. That was here and here. We had a few 6s, and then after that, there was really just a couple of 5s, and that's where I sort of cut it off when you see the blue highlights. Arguably, here's a 4. We have one that got 4 votes, 120. So arguably we could, somebody might say that really was important. And we really should be thinking about including that as well, because it's just right there at the cutoff. When we drop down to 3s, we're getting to way too many recommendations, I think, to consider. But I want to give people a chance to really argue for things that you voted for, that you do think are important, but you're not seeing come out in the blue highlighted higher end of the spectrum here. So I can go through these fairly methodically and show you which ones came to the top by just reading these or cross-referencing these, if that would be helpful. Yeah, Paula, do you have a
I was just
suggestion?
wondering, like, before we kind of dive into this, if it would be productive to kind of remain open to the possibility of kind of like some of the top ones, if there are some that are like pretty closely related that came to the top, like maybe in the final letter condensing them. But yeah, so I just, it's not really a process suggestion, just to like, maybe we can remain open to that suggestion.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful.
Great.
And I guess to that point, you know, it's somewhat arbitrary, the number of recommendations that we move forward in this letter. So I want to be very open to the fact that it could be 10, it could be 5, it could be 15, you know, it could be 5 in each group or 10 in each group. I think that's completely up to you. So open to that as well. Val, did I see your hand go up? Yes, Val.
Yes, and I have a similar comment to Paula. I was wondering if you saw trends across pathways. For pathway 4 have the most votes. I will say that for my votes, not having them grouped by a pathway or by land use category or ones that related to infrastructure, I felt that there was repetition and I couldn't remember, oh, did I check a box that was very similar to this?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, they weren't particularly organized by pathway, and that might have been helpful in terms of thinking about, you know, how they build on each other. Andrea?
I liked your suggestion earlier because I'm struggling to even, I don't know that I have other than what was provided in the poll, I don't know that I have them listed out like this. Do we have that readily available? Is that something we can put in the chat or something? Because I
Yeah, I
can't
sent this in the
recall
email
which
out.
number I voted for, but if we read through some of the top ones, I might feel a little bit more comfortable, like, oh yeah, I was on board with that one, or I wasn't on board with that one. Or I know that could be time consuming, but I don't know if anybody else is kind of feeling like, I don't know how to feel strongly on any of these because I don't really remember what they are.
Okay, all right. Well, let's take the time. We do have the time to go through them. And you should have received with Marion's email a spreadsheet. This is I'm just showing you the back end of the spreadsheet, the last couple of columns, and just the ones that were red. We sent you a spreadsheet that had all of the actions and highlighted in red those that were either no action or were blank. So if you can find her email and bring that up, you'll have your own copy in front of you, but I am more than happy to go through this. I may not read the entire thing, but I'll at least give you the starter for remembering what it was about. So the first one under category 1 was got 5 votes, and it was to help individuals, municipalities, and businesses through the process of weatherization, energy efficiency, and fuel switching upgrades by establishing and funding weatherization and efficiency navigators at each regional planning commission. The next one that got, I think I have it as 8, but it should be 6 votes here. Next one got 6 votes was strategically integrate. This was the second one, strategically integrate planning and preparedness across disciplines and geographies, addressing the interdependencies of transportation, energy, communications, and other systems. Stop me. I see some hands up. Stop me at any point, and we can discuss them too. Stephanie and then Andrea.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I think you're on the wrong list. These are the 2s, not the 1s.
Oh, whoops. Apologies. Obviously set it up wrong. Here you go. That was the last group that I printed. Thank you. Very helpful. All right, let's start over. Number 1, work with Vermont villages and property owners to relocate septic systems and public and private drinking water wells. They're at risk for flooding. Am I better now? We on the right track? Okay. 2, expand the existing
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Hands back up.
Sorry, new hand. So there's a couple instances in here where this doesn't apply just to this first one, but I think it applies to the second one. It applies to a few others where the language is very general. And I would say if we're talking about an existing program, we need to call that out. So if we're saying give additional funding to do this work, let's call out the program that's doing that so we know where let's make that connection for them, because I don't want them to be making that connection on their own if we already know what program exists. Does that make sense? So ANR already has a program around relocating septic and water, so let's call that out here.
Okay. Well, we'll probably need to rely on you to let us know that.
And then the second one, I don't know if that's referring to the funding that I manage specifically, which can do that, or if it's referring to ACCD funding and their mobile home program. I don't know which that's intending to refer to, or both. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that's gonna be hard for us, I think, to go back and try to figure out. Since this was completed last year, and we don't have all the authors here, so there may be some ambiguity we have to kind of leave there. Alice.
Yes, I'd like to point out to everyone that, and first I apologize because I really kind of missed out on opportunity to participate in this group due to some personal stuff that happened leading up to Thanksgiving for me. But I really liked going through this list for a reason. I kind of straddle municipal, regional planning commission, Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, and understanding a number of the FEMA programs and state programs. And what I like about this list is that I see many areas here that maybe there's no action taken or we're not sure who's doing what, but there's a lot of opportunities here to promote knowledge of these programs that exist at the various levels and promote support and collaboration with them. There's some really good things. In this first instance, I also believe that FEMA has a program on the relocating septic systems, or they're going to develop one. The ones that have the rules on what has to happen, if there is the rule the way it's stated now, and that would be within FEMA and our floodplain managers. If there is a septic failure, it has to be replaced. So what happens is it has to move above ground. But the kicker here is the only thing that happens with the failed system is that it's capped off. So that stays there. So I would be looking at enhancing the program about what happens in a flood area with sewer and septic.
And you're saying in addition to ANR's program, a FEMA,
Yes.
FEMA program?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what you're saying basically is that number one, FEMA only does it if the horse is already out of the barn.
Right.
Yes.
And number two, they don't actually mitigate the existing system.
Correct. It's
Right.
just
So it would be
capped
kind of
off.
on the state more
Yeah.
to be proactive and also to like deal with the mitigation part.
Yes.
Andrea?
I think this is great discussion, but I think it could take a
Forever.
long time. So I'm wondering if instead we should start with the 8s, move to the 7, like maybe look at the top 5 or 6 and go through those in some discussion and then say, you know, what else was left out of this? Or do folks feel like something that they voted for is really missing? Because I think all this discussion is great, but it's just going to take a really long time if we go through each one in this detail.
And I would second that, in that the legislature is not going to take a look at all of these either. They do not have the time, just as a body.
Right.
Just
Good
why
idea.
they need us to prioritize them in this fashion. Yep.
Yeah.
So I was only going to go through the blue ones, but do you want me to do it in the
Oh.
order of the highest to the lowest? Would that be more helpful?
I don't know. I was sort of just wondering if we should just do like the top 5 or 6 and then see how people are feeling about those. Or
Well, let's
but-
jump to this one. So this is 1.6, which got 8. expand the existing downtown and village tax credit programs eligibility to offset the cost to elevate or flood-proof existing buildings located in areas with increased flood risks. Any concerns or questions that doesn't deserve to be on the list? The other next 8 is 1.18. That was a cross-cutting. These in blue were cross-cutting recommendations. Increase investment in municipalities to improve, expand, and build new drinking water and wastewater infrastructure to support compact development, including asset management tools to support long-term operation and maintenance. Any questions about that one?
I think that ties very strongly to the 1.1, right? Relocating, I know that's private, never mind. This is talking about public facilities, 1.1 is talking about private.
I just lowered my hand, but I think that lumping of themes is going to be important, because I feel like in the second one, I think in the second set, there's quite a bit on sort of municipal infrastructure. So I don't, there's a lot on.
The second
Yes.
set of questions.
Pardon me, David?
You mean, Andrea, you mean the second body of questions?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go to the 7s. 1.8 is a 7. Identify, whoops, I need a little more space here. Oh, this is a long one. Identify mission critical facilities in collaboration with local and regional planners, utilities, and transportation providers to identify actions, procedures, or investments to mitigate the impact of extreme weather events to services provided by these facilities. And the rest are examples. Anybody second guessing their vote on that one? The next one that got 7 votes was 123. Make village centers permanently eligible for the downtown transportation fund that builds infrastructure needed to increase walking, biking, and transit. Yeah, Andrea.
This is one of the ones that I struggled with in this first set, because it's sort of that that overlap or that continuum of mitigation versus adaptation. We have to do so much in the mitigation space for adaptation reasons, but I thought maybe it might be a valuable conversation to have here, because I feel like that one is more towards mitigation, but maybe I'm not seeing things correct there.
What are others?
Draw me the distinction. I'm sorry, I'm not between mitigation and adaptation.
So actual emissions, mitigating emissions versus adapting to climate change.
To the impact of those emissions, right?
Mhm.
So for mitigation
They may be
purposes,
different, but I sure see a lot of overlap.
yeah, Paula?
There definitely is, but there's a lot of other subcommittees that are focusing on the mitigation. So I think that might be an important thing for us to decide, and maybe it'll just come out naturally in our prioritization here. But as a subcommittee, what is the focus?
Paula and then Alice.
Yeah, so I actually think that given the, money is not infinite, that it's actually an advantage for it to also be a mitigation measure. And I think it would be good to like call that out as, one of the reasons we're supporting this is because we think it will do both. And, the money's limited. So I think that's actually really cool. And it would be a cool thing to say, here's the reason this is a priority, like you can do both at once.
Alice?
Yeah, Paula makes a very good point. I think it just mitigation just flow. It just is there in this category, which I think is important. A lot of what happens when you're doing this infrastructure is the municipality or the state programs funding these activities has to look at where you're building, because where you're developing and where you're building can very much affect the flooding possibilities within the downtown areas. So you've got to look at this. There's always a tension between building and needing to conserve areas that help mitigate flooding. So yeah, I think Paul is right. You got to look at this as a whole.
Yeah.
The other thing is, among these, there is action being taken on this. There's a legislature mandated a special committee to look at all of the ACCD downtown programs, the neighborhood development areas, the town centers, which are a kind of a list of everything the town can do, which becomes very confusing, difficult to apply for. The rules are very cumbersome. So they have just released the first draft of where they're going with these changes. So they're going to, actually, I think some of the changes that they're going to be making will be quite big. And the idea is to help communities simplify the process and being more available for the maximum amount of things like tax credits and funding across state agencies.
So we should note that,
Yes.
or recognize that. Maybe we need to find out a more specific reference to it.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to point out, if you look at the strategy under column E, most of these crossover recommendations came because they were intended to promote compact development. So that was what
Yes.
that was in support of, right? So that compact development presumably is both a mitigation and an adaptation, as we've been talking about. And Anne.
My question with this particular one, and it sort of relates to a lot of them, is capacity. If a program like this has all the federal rules attached to it, it is out of capacity for our tiniest towns unless there's something that's going to strengthen our tiny towns' capacity.
You're talking about actual staff capacity or funding capacity? I mean, this is about
I'm
funding.
talking about both. I'm talking about a tiny, we have a ton of small towns that are run by volunteer select boards with no paid administrator, no town manager, a part-time clerk. And there just isn't the capacity to write these very complex grants without some additional support. Thanks.
Great.
It's my
There's a
hobby horse.
program.
Sorry.
There is a program that's just being released and funded for those kinds of towns. It's called the Municipal Technical Assistance Program, where those small rural towns will get state funding or state representation to help them write grants and proposals. And they just identified the top 50 towns in a priority list.
Great, great. So we talked about the first 6 as we go down the list in voting. 6, number 2, or at least we mentioned it. So number 2 is just a reminder, was expand the existing programs to relocate mobile home parks and residents. The next one is 1.6, which is expand the existing downtown and village tax credit program eligibility to offset costs to elevate or flood-proof existing buildings. That's sort of very much along the similar lines of the one we talked about, compact development. The next 6 is 1.16. If I'm not making everybody dizzy here. Review and expand existing programs to support landlords in weatherizing rental properties, including et cetera, et cetera. Different programs noted. Any comments about any of those? And there's one more 6, which is 124.
Can you, Catherine, I just missed that one because I couldn't see it on the screen.
Oh. 116 is this one. Review and expand existing programs to support landlords in weatherizing rental properties. And then it mentions a couple programs. Okay.
I see a little bit more of a connection for resilience on that one, but I still struggle with that mitigation resilience. I did with a lot of these, so.
If I might, I can't find my raise your hand button on this, whatever I'm using. One of my concerns is that the homeowners I'm sure they wouldn't be left out. But in terms of providing technical assistance, in terms of providing financial resources, and making it easy for homeowners to access either mitigation or resilience activities, is not in this document. And you know, we're all out here in the rural areas. We're all spread out. We may or may not talk to our neighbors. In terms of resilience, I have a small stream that flows across my property. There are 3 culverts above me. There are 2 or 3 culverts below me before the stream joins the Saxtons River and flows into the Connecticut. Any one of those culverts up or downstream from me gives out, I lose my culvert too. And so we may not be able to craft perfect language and design a program that does outreach to homeowners to assist in resilience, but I think we ought to mention it. Going back to the assistant, the ombudsman position in regional planning commissions, that should, homeowners should be specifically mentioned as part of their responsibility. When we talk about assistance for floodproofing, whether it's in a downtown area or a rural area, homeowners should be named. It should be understood that we want homeowners to be active participants also, and we will help them the way we will anyone else. So it's just something that I would hope that people keep in mind as we are crafting this language.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think I do recall there are some specific actions in here that address homeowner needs specifically, or, you know, individual needs. I can't remember where they are. But the other thing, I guess I just want to confirm that one thing we just sort of agreed to last time was that we weren't going to create new recommendations. If to the extent that there are gaps like that, David, that you see in this list, we do need to acknowledge that the CAP is continuing their work. I mean, the council is continuing their work. We'll be updating the CAP, and as part of that, you know, really paying very close attention to those types of gaps. So agreed, there may be some things in here that, you know, you see are missing. And rather than, you know, don't have the time to, you know, to try to develop those recommendations at the level of the council, new recommendations level of council. So I think that's a little bit of a pushing it down the road, but to say, yes, we recognize this needs to be taken up later. So I'm glad that you flagged that. I think those are things that we need to flag.
And whoever is going to write the final version, I'm just saying it so that they have it in mind. Homeowner, homeowner should be a ubiquitous phrase in terms of active responsibilities of positions we are creating, like the ombudsman at the Regional Planning Commission.
Right. I don't know.
And on that, David,
Yes.
I'll just say, so when we get to the twos, 2.14 and 2.2 relate directly to expansion of the state hazard mitigation funding program, which is currently the Flood Resilient Communities Fund, where the idea is that we're increasing flexibility in what we can't fund with FEMA dollars, or giving more flex, or providing match for FEMA elevations or buyouts or floodproofing projects. And so that it's tied directly into those two actions. The program isn't called out at this point, so when we get to that, I'll add it. But that's the intent there, is that we're better serving residents also, so community projects, but also residents through that fund.
Val?
I just wanted to speak to one point. Is it review and expanding programs for weatherizing rentals? And I think that's the sweet spot between mitigation and adaptation, just because supporting weatherization, electrification, storage for rental properties, especially low income ones, improves the resilience of our communities. It's an important one, but I don't know how this plays into not creating new criteria or new suggestions, but I think this one really would benefit from policy support and incentive to address this.
You're talking about 123 now? Or
Is 1.16 on the spreadsheet I have
1.16.
open, review and expand existing programs,
okay.
landlords and weatherizing rental properties.
Okay, I'm going to stop here. It's taken a fair amount of time to get through these, and we have the second category to get through. And just ask if folks want to continue to review these additional, we have a couple of fives here. I think these are, that would give us, if just looking at the ones that we've covered so far, that's not quite 10. And we do want to give you a chance to further prioritize these through maybe a subsequent exercise. So let me ask you, do you want to continue to go through these individually, or do you want to have some time to review it in more detail and then do a secondary ranking exercise or some sort of exercise to further narrow this? How are people feeling about this list so far? I'm particularly, yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
It sounded like there was a fair amount of kind of pushback on, I can't remember the exact one it was. But yeah,
Mike's-
like maybe we could just like do some kind of vote about like, like yes, no, maybe. Because I feel like, if somebody feels really strongly that something is, worded not well or is something they don't fully support, it's probably also less likely to get supported by the council. And also, like, just as a group, I feel like we should be aligning around things that we all feel strongly should be there. So that's just my thought.
I think it might have been 1.23. And I also think that if we do secondary ranking, which I think we're going to need to, that we need to be really clear about this one is for this purpose, how we're breaking them out into these two groups, to make sure that the recommendations that we're making under this one meet that sort of category. Because I think there is a lot of crossover in both of the lists. So, or, like those themes that could be drawn. So I think some of these things on this list could be met depending on how we rank the second set too.
Well, I'm going to suggest, given the time we've got, that we do move to the second set and see how people are feeling at that point, if that works. Paula, you're nodding your head, but do you have a question too?
Yeah, I guess I was just gonna say, just like thinking of the final letter logistically, like we could have these as a table. And it could be like, we could have the sort of like overall, like, I think it's good to keep the exact wording from the cap, but then like the leftmost column could be like you know, the way we're summing it up, like as a bucket.
I
Okay,
think that's how the last set of recommendations that came from this group were kind of lumped like that too. Makes sense.
all right, let's move, and maybe people will be feeling more certain about what they want to do with this. Let's move to this. Give you some more space so you can see this.
Bronwyn does have her hand up.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
No, thanks, Andrea. I can save my question for after this next round. I think it'll still be relevant. Thanks.
So in this group, there weren't as many consolidated, we didn't get any 8s, I'll put it that way. But there was a pretty significant drop off in votes after the 6s. So you'll see here highlighted only, or after the 5s, then we drop down to, I think there's only 1 or 2 4s. So we have, the first one, is, let me move here. First one that got a 7, which was our highest number of votes altogether, was to help individuals, municipalities, and businesses through the process of weatherization, energy efficiency, and fuel switching. Again, it's very much a mitigation, perhaps, upgrades, as well as it seems like another crossover. By establishing the funding, weatherization, and efficiency navigators at each regional planning commission. So this seemed to be, it fell into, yes, it's something that provides resources to the local level, but it looks like I categorized it here because it seems like it's establishing new funding and a new position, which would require more capacity. That's where, again, sort of debatable which one it should go in, but I just wondered if anybody had any comments about that one.
Well, you do have the community action agencies, BEC, energy saving utility in the field doing exactly that. Is this calling for an increase or
Yes.
something new beyond those two entities?
Anne, can you speak to that, or do you have a separate question?
No, I'd be happy to speak to that. Thank you. This is the field that I work in with Heat Squad, doing outreach to help people learn about getting home energy audits. And if you look at the the latest report on how we're moving towards meeting our goals, we're not doing enough. The situation has gotten so complicated. There are so many programs. The rates for rebates keep changing all the time. Different programs offer different services. It's very difficult for a busy homeowner to figure out where they ought to even start. So I think it's pretty important to do this work. And I mean, the biggest gap is in terms of the people our residents who are spending the most on their energy bills are low and moderate income people. So it's often the people that are right near the edge. They don't fit with the community action. Their incomes are too high for the community action programs, but they're very busy people, and there's just not a lot out there to help them navigate. It's very complex. It keeps getting increasingly complex.
What is a new position? It would be a new sort of coordinator, direct assistance position, technical assistance position. So just to keep us moving, Paula and then Alice, if you have some short comments, either for or again.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of directly address David's question and just say, like, from my perspective, the operative word here is help them through the process. And so, like,
Yeah.
it's an established process, but what they need is technical assistance, just like getting through it. And like one recommendation might be just like, can't we just simplify this? But it's not the recommendation that was already made in the cap. So I feel like, and also I really like it because it has those homeowners in there, David.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Alice?
Yeah, just very quickly, Paul is right and everyone's right. Anne's right when you talk about the economic profiles of people that need this weatherization. We have a program here in Waitsfield throughout the valley that's a nonprofit, loosely put together volunteers that actually do weatherization, boots on the ground. You just go do it. And the target are low income elderly people relying on Social Security, people that want to stay in their homes. On the municipality level, the towns who have town plans we just finished an upgrade to our town plan. And we were tasked with Act 174, which is the energy plan and the energy law that the state adapted, that will be having some changes coming up. And in that law, municipalities are tasked with reducing their carbon emissions and reliance on fossil fuels at intervals like 2020, 2030, 2050, et cetera. So at every marking place, we have to say, we've reduced by this and show progress. And it's programs like this that are really needed to reduce the reliance on running a fossil fueled old heating program.
Yeah, it sounds like we've got a lot of support for this one. And David, hopefully that addressed some of your questions. Stephanie, do you?
I'm moving us to the next one, if that,
Good.
if that helps, before you
Yes.
get mad about my hand. So on 2.3, this directly ties to the work that I do. The administration is talking about this as well. And if we have to leave the exact language, that's fine. But if I can amend it, I would say it shouldn't just be for buyouts. It should be for the hazard mitigation grant program, which then includes elevations and floodproofing and other town infrastructure projects as well. So instead of the word buyouts, I would put in hazard mitigation grant program, which is what the administration is talking about and will hopefully support.
Well, maybe that's a point of clarification we can make. Yeah, other comments, David? You found your hand.
That was going to be my first statement. I found raise my hand. Going back to the last question, so it is an increase. We are going to strengthen the various programs to do outreach and engage homeowners and municipalities. Thank you.
Yeah. Paula?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, as a practical matter, like, is there another column that would be like optional add for the council? Like, if you accept this recommendation, like, can we also like reach consensus around like, well, this could be better by blah, blah, blah. It's like not maybe like hedging a bit about like maybe the language in the cap is doesn't need to be exact about, like that's what we've got, but like it's a real recommendation for the legislature, like maybe consider this add-on. So.
And Catherine, sorry, just to abridge what you said, what you typed in, I would say in caps, the hazard mitigation grant program. So it's specifically that FEMA program, because right now this program applies to public assistance. HMGP is what follows that. So it's specifically that program that we're talking about.
Got it. Peter. Okay. Let's go to those were only sixes, so everything else is a 5. So let's go to 210. No, excuse me, 25.
Can we
220
jump
was
to
a 6, wasn't it?
214 and 220 are both 6s, and I have a comment on those two, sorry.
Fourteen.
So 214 and 220 were both sixes. Those, if I would put them together, but if we need to keep them separate, that's fine, but they need to at least be adjacent because they're both directly tied to Vermont Emergency Management's existing Flood Resilient Communities Fund program and making that permanent and more flexible. So I'd call out the program and I would put those two together.
216, you said?
To 2.14 and 2.20.
Oh, 2.20.
Yes.
So
So
2.1
put them together and it's the Flood Resilient Communities Fund that we're
Yeah.
talking about.
increase and create a permanent state fund. This is increased capacity and funding for design and implementation of local and regional climate adaptation resilience projects. And 220, which got 6 votes, yeah. Establish a dedicated comprehensive state level program with funding for strategically purchase or match funding for hazard prone properties, easements to conserve river corridors, floodplains, forest, etc.
Yeah, so it's all one program, not two separate things, and it's the Flood Resilient Communities Fund currently, but the need is to establish sustainable long-term funding for a more flexible future version of that program.
I do think though it's worth it for 2.14, it doesn't specifically just speak to flooding, I think, and we have, when we get to the letter too, we're looking at sort of resilience from sort of an all hazards approach, not just flooding. And so if we do combine them, I think speaking to a fund that focuses not just on flooding hazards, which is what the Flood Resilient Communities Fund in 2.20 is focused on right now.
Right.
Maybe
absolutely
separate.
Yeah, I think but the intent is sustainable long-term funding for a program that does cover more than just flood resilience. That's just the existing program. So yes.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else have any comments about 216 or 220? Okay. You want Anne?
I have a quick comment. Is that are those existing, what Stephanie was talking about, are those new programs that were already created and therefore this section of this document that we're in is sort of inaccurate in that this is work that has already taken place, but it's not listed as such?
So we have ARPA funding, which is temporary. So the program doesn't exist in statute. It right now only includes flooding and needs to be expanded to include other hazards. Yeah. And it's temporary ARPA funding. So permanent state funding is still in need.
All right, I'm going to jump back to 2.5, which got 5 votes. So our next level down, evaluate the risks and opportunities created by potential climate change in migration to Vermont's critical infrastructure. This is definitely one of those, it's a statewide program, which is sort of why it fell here. I don't know if that means it needs new capacity or new funding, but it is a statewide initiative. Questions, comments?
Can you just repeat how many votes it got? I'm sorry.
5. So that's over here. 2.5, 5. And then 2.10 also got 5. Most of the rest are going to get 5. Create a rental registry and inspection program to locate all Vermont's rental housing and improve their quality and safety. Again, sort of sounds like it's a statewide kind of database to create on rental properties. Alice.
Yeah, this idea of a state, this is really at the state level. Some municipalities are doing it for Airbnbs, etc. But this has bounced around for a while at the state. So it depends on whether the governor would sign legislation to do this. But it's important.
Okay, so you're behind it, Paula?
Okay.
Paula?
Yeah, sorry. I actually had highlighted the thing about 2.5 because I was worried we weren't going to take it up. So yeah, I think this is actually a really important evaluate the risks and opportunities created by potential climate change in migration. I think that is really super important for us to initiate. So I'd like to argue for that when it comes down to it.
Okay. The next 5 is 2.11. Complete a statewide climate change impact assessment for Vermont's commercial sector and natural resource-based industries, including but not limited to ski, sugaring, logging industries. There it calls out statewide. Any comments? I'm assuming that unless you raise concerns, that people are feeling pretty comfortable with these. 214 we'd covered. The next 5 is 218. See where we get with that. That is expand public investment, particularly hazard mitigation funding to flood-prone or to flood-proof or relocate drinking water and wastewater. This is very similar to one we saw earlier. Treatment infrastructure at significant risk of flooding. I think it's the expand public investment that kind of put it into this category, along with the fact that it doesn't say specifically for local governments, but it's, again, a sort of a statewide initiative. As I recall, we talked about one very similar to this up in category 1. That would be an opportunity to lump. Let's see. So that was, excuse me, I lost track. 211? No. 218. Okay. So, 222. Increase low-income weatherization through the State Weatherization Assistance Program, including technical assistance to help households and landlords manage the process. Sounds similar to the navigators. Yeah, David.
My comment goes to the one we just left, and that is that for infrastructure, wastewater and drinking water, that pretty much is a 1 point funding mechanism through the bonding fund that the state does in the capital bill every year. So when I read that, I immediately translated it to an increase in funding for the capital expenditure for those items, and allowing a larger percentage to be used for those purposes. One of the things about that fund is that it sets out in fairly, there are a lot of strings attached to that money. And I think the recommendation is to loosen up, allow for resilience to be built into those grant applications to that fund that is funded through the capital bill by the legislature.
Okay, well, that's a good clarification. All right, so where are we now? 218. We just did 222, and our last one is 228. And this was a direct ask of the legislature to encourage the legislature to authorize the creation of a multi-stakeholder committee process with funding to support the development of a statewide land use planning policy and implementation plan, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on. So you can see, whoops, see the whole thing there. How are people feeling? Comfortable with that? Falling into therein? David?
Yeah, I'm comfortable and support it. I had to chuckle because that structure was part of Madeline Cunan's Act 200 legislation back in the 1980s. And we are going back to the future, people.
So we have covered all of these that were 5 and above. So let's just talk about for a minute what we want to do in terms of either narrowing these further, giving you a little more time to think about it, and revoting. We have a couple of options. So one option, I think, given our time, is that after this meeting, Bronwyn, let me let you in before I get into the specifics.
Thanks. I do think this is a good time to ask my question. And apologies if this was covered, but I think maybe my thoughts on it have changed after this. Is there, when we say narrow, like what is our goal? Are we looking for a specific number that we think seems reasonable? Are we looking for actions that are we think are easiest to get through this legislative session? Are we looking for things that are gaps that aren't already being addressed in other programs? It would be helpful, I think, to kind of get an understanding of how we're looking to narrow one. The other thing I just wanted to throw out there is, I think other people have noticed as well, some of these, I feel like, I mean, I know we're not trying to change the language necessarily too much, but I feel like some of these could very easily be packaged. There's, I think, at least like 3 recommendations that have to do with weatherization generally, just to different target audiences. There's a host of recommendations around drinking water, just a difference between whether it's public or private infrastructure. So I would like to know our tolerance for grouping these actions, and does that count as narrowing it if we're grouping it into more like sort of bite-sized chunks for the legislature to, or sorry, for the speaker to understand what we're recommending. And then the other question is, that I've noticed is there's a pretty big discrepancy in the actions in terms of how actionable they are and how specific they are. There's some that are very specific, a specific program expanding the funds, and there's others that are more very general and maybe not quite as actionable. And so I just wanted to throw those out as things that I'm noticing, and would like to try and understand how we're thinking about those things to define like what is our goal for narrowing.
Yes, and I think some of those points have been raised by others as well. I think there is a general agreement. We want to lump things together that are alike, and that could make it seem as, that could make it both more digestible as well as maybe allow us to include more recommendations that don't seem as overwhelming. 2, yes, some of these are more specific than others. I think our dilemma here is we are not really in a position to be able to kind of redraft these actions. We can maybe provide some clarification where that's needed. But I guess I would ask you guys, when you prioritize, if you do find things that you feel like are too general, if we need to provide some further clarification, we can, but it has to sort of be on the side, and it would have to move up to the council. And finally, yes, how many? I think that's entirely up to you. And David sort of at the top of the hour said, the legislature can only deal with so much, and the more we give them, the less likely they are to take any action on the things that you think are most important. So others want to weigh in on how many? I think the narrowing process could help us see, if there's a huge drop off between the top 5 versus everything else, so I think if we did another exercise and allowed you to rank them, that might give us a little more information about how everybody is feeling about the priorities. But I don't know that there's any magic number. Anybody else have any thoughts about this narrowing process? Oh, I think the other point you brought up is, yes, what the letter has asked us to do is to provide recommendations that the legislature can act on this year. So I would assume that translates into things that you think are most urgent for action to happen. Would others agree?
Yeah, and that goes back to my comment earlier about the legislature. I urge us to prioritize half a dozen ideas tops. And just as a target, and at that, given the full agenda for a legislature every year and the process that they have to go through, you'd be lucky to get half of those that get attention, let alone actually pass. I mean, it it's a lot of work up there.
Yeah. Paula?
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about, your experiences, David, and having been on the legislature, and how that could, like, you could help us kind of lump things in such a way that it would be most useful to the speaker and the legislature. Like, do we want to have, like, is the category, I've been thinking about different ways to lump it, by recipient of services, but like, I'm thinking now, like, maybe we want to think about, like, how would a law normally be crafted about something? Like, if it's about weatherization, would you put the, like, you put the public and private and whatever all together in one piece of legislation, or is it more likely to be split over different, funding recipients, or like, just thinking about, I mean, I suppose there are multiple ways to create legislation, but there are probably also just sort of standard best practices about how things get lumped as a piece of legislation. So just a thought.
The speaker, the president pro tem, will have to assign the issues as they are crafted to a committee. First, it will go to a jurisdictional committee, meaning a non-money committee. And you have to think about the structure of the legislature in terms of there's an energy committee, there's a natural resources committee, there's a health and welfare committee, there's a general and housing committee, and you might use that as a screen through which to organize, or by which to organize the issues, because after the jurisdictional committees, then the money committees take the recommendations and either pay for them or do not. So that's just another way of organizing it. Is it the best? For their purposes, I would argue that it is. For people understanding what the Climate Council is doing overall, it might be a stretch.
Well, I sort of feel like, this is just my immediate reaction to that. Like, we should do it in a way that we think it's going to get implemented and, most readily, like the path of least resistance. So I really like the idea of jurisdictional, like separating it by like the different committees. I think that's possibly a plan we could adopt.
Yeah, and your help on that, David, would be great. My question would be, well, where does wastewater treatment plants go? Is that health and welfare, or is there some other committee?
Really funny. Now, there's that is going to the institutions committee.
Institutions.
Institutions, yep. And it would be a package of funding for wastewater and water. It's really the only outlet that the state has, and all of the federal funds that come in for those two areas, other than FEMA funding, emergency funding, goes through that committee in that budget. So it's all the federal and state monies for drinking water and wastewater will end up as an institutions issue.
So I'm assuming that private septic and wells would not be under institutions, right?
Right. That would,
Yeah.
well,
So that's an
money,
important data point. Yeah.
Yeah, the money for them would probably be in the budget, but the jurisdiction is with the Agency of Natural Resources for all private and public drinking water and septic, in-ground septic.
Thanks. So Marion, are you gonna get us back on track here?
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, I appreciate sort of the brainstorming about how to best make it useful for the legislature, but acknowledging sort of the time we have to be able to pull these recommendations together and discuss them with the Climate Council. I think there's some good recommendations in the chat about how we can actually prioritize our actions. Either grouping them by broad themes and then ranking them and providing clarification if needed. And then if we have time, we could think about how to best sort of group them in the letter to be useful to the legislature, but acknowledging sort of the time that we have to get this as a draft to the council. I think we should, you know, work to think about how best to sort of prioritize and get a good set that we feel comfortable with within the letter. And then the other thing, I think it's interesting hearing feedback on, you know, some of the actions in here that could use some updates or use some changes or sort of reference specific programs that didn't previously. I think perhaps we could think about how in the letter to add some explanation or add some clarification to actions. I think there's a real benefit to having both in sort of presentation to the council and presentation to the legislature, referencing the actions in the climate action plan as it was adopted, as that language was adopted, but can also acknowledge that was adopted in December 2021. Time has passed since then. There could be some additional clarification to the actions as they sit in the letter. We could still reference the original language, but maybe an additional column clarifying or sort of providing some additional detail where we're elevating actions that maybe need some more specificity. So don't think that that should be a limiting factor for us.
And what I'm hearing both from David's advice and others is that we do need to sort of go down from 10 to 12 in each of these categories to a more narrow set of priorities. So I'm going to suggest, and happy to hear what others have as a better idea, that after this meeting that we do some of that, take the ones that rose to the top here, and give you that list back in a more, maybe a way that at least puts things side by side that are very similar, like all the wastewater stuff together and all the weatherization stuff together, so that you can just see it that way rather than in these two categories. I don't know if we need to keep it in these two categories, because that sort of throws things in, you know, spreads them out again. But we'll take it if you'll trust us to just try to work on that and make it a little more logical, and then ask you to do a online ranking order or exercise where you pick the top 5. And that will tell us a little bit more about how close you are in thinking what that next level of priority should be. And then we'll share that back with you. Does that make sense,
Sounds
Paula?
like a plan.
Yeah. I wonder, are we thinking, yeah, I think that's a great plan. I had first a question about timeline, and then thinking also like what counts as a recommendation versus a very specific action as now worded. Like, is the recommendation the lumped version, or is the recommendation like one priority is one recommendation? Because I think that limits us maybe too much based on the amount of overlap between things that we have voted on. I mean, I think we have a lot of consensus actually already. So
yeah, and it might be hard to answer that until we see it, we see it what it looks like when we start moving things around and lumping them together. But I hear you. That'll give us a little more flexibility. Okay, so good timing, because we wanted to now have some time for public comment. If we have any public, do we have any public, Marion?
I don't think that we do.
Nope. Okay. Please speak up if you're in the public and we're just not seeing your name or your image. All right. that case, that gives us a little more time to then also talk about the letter. And Paula has agreed sort of as part of as a member of the drafting committee to kind of walk you through the letter that we sent out, that they worked on. Great work. And I think what then we'll just needs to drop into that letter are our recommendations. So I'll hand it over to you and Paula, and if you want to share your screen, or I can share the letter if that's helpful.
I just got a new computer and now it's like asking me for permissions, but it looks like it's, oh, it's gonna make me quit Zoom. So yeah, you better share it. Sorry about that.
I have it up. I brought it up beforehand. Oh, no, that's the list. So it was sent out as a PDF. Is that right? I think I must have it
I
up.
think it's a Word doc.
Was a
There
Word.
was a link and I have it if you want me to share.
Okay.
Want me to
Searching. I had it up.
No,
before the
I want
meeting.
to share. No, I want to share.
We have multiple sharing capacity here. So if you can do that, that'd be great, Andrea.
Great. So thank you so much. I think that our work group we had a great process. It sounds like some of the language might change based on what we're sort of like considering a recommendation and how we categorize them. But basically, just to show you what the letter is, it's like, hi, we're also worried. And then there's kind of this piece about having a broad vision and how we need to, we have yet to align around a broad vision as both like legislature, council, state agencies. So there's a little bit of language about that probably people might want to discuss. Then what might be, I don't know how controversial, but we definitely want to talk about, we had some of these things that we wanted to sort of say, yes, we have these very specific recommendations, but also approaches and long-term thinking are important. So we had sort of like two considerations for them to take into account that we're going to recommend. So an inclusive all hazards approach means basically like we know flooding is a problem. We're all like still devastated by what happened in central Vermont this summer, but also we have to think about more than floods. And then the other has more to do about socioeconomic kind of future thinking about what's going to happen to the economy and the people who rely on it. So those are two considerations that we'll want to talk about probably. And then I think it just gets into the recommendations. Is that right? Yeah, so then we get into the recommendations, which is going to be restructured possibly. And there's an explanation sort of like about how we narrowed it down. And then just at the bottom, it's just kind of like, hey, we're still worried by. So that's kind of is that the level of detail that people want and need, or oh, and also we're inviting more dialogue, which I think is, standard and important. So.
Does it also say somewhere in there that the cap is, I think, yeah, it does. The cap is going to be updated. Is that the paragraph?
Yeah, so in the part about the sort of like creating a vision for resilience and adaptation, it talks about the updates to the climate action plan and also the state hazard mitigation plan.
So if folks have not had time to read it through, we can give you a minute or two just to do that. If again, it was attached to Marion's email to you, so you should have it on your own computer. Or are there any specific questions about language or how this is framed that you'd like to raise? Anybody need more time? Let me ask that. Can you raise your hand if you need more time? Your virtual hand so I can see it.
It's well done.
See lots of nodding heads. So, yeah, let me just give us one more minute. Anybody have any suggestions in terms of ways we might improve it? I saw, actually, I did see in the chat, quick. You add 2023 to the SHMP reference.
I think
That's-
Marion's got it. Quick edit.
And that is, where is that in the letter?
It's
Yeah,
right.
Andrea has it highlighted.
Yeah, state
We're
hazard
set to
mitigation
update it.
plan. Yeah.
There, right. Okay. My chat box covered you up.
Marion or Andrea, do you want me to be like taking notes on how we're going to update things?
Sounds like Marion might be doing it real time right now.
Perfect.
not.
I love it.
Oh, you're
Oh,
not?
okay.
Oh, I thought Stephanie saw you make an edit. I did not, so. Yeah, then that would probably be good, Paula.
Great. Okay.
Any other
Um,
suggestions? Well, we thought
We
that was
might have to tweak it more. Oh, excuse me. We might have to tweak it more once we get the content, the attachment in there.
Yeah.
right.
But I think
Right.
this is great for now.
Yeah, the description of how we arrived at the categories and that sort of thing, we may need to change and clarify. All right, well, great. We thought that was going to require a little more discussion. But what I do want to revisit now is sort of the timeline for what we have to get ready for the council. So as I recall, we have to have a draft to them, including the recommendations, by the 11th of December in advance of their the December 18th meeting. So that gives us 11 days. Would like to get the next ranking exercise out to you by Monday. That would give us today to just sort of make sure we can do this bundling that's been requested, and also maybe figure out ways to just capture and share with you the clarifications we've already heard about around some of these that I captured in the spreadsheet. Then that if it would be up to a quick turnaround if we could get your responses within, literally a couple of days, say by Wednesday, close of business. That puts us on just opening my calendar, the 6th. And then if we want to regather, we could regather next Friday, if that's a possibility. In fact, we had sort of a hold on Friday at 9 o'clock next week in case we needed to get together again. I don't know if that went out to everybody or that was just our internal hold. And that would give us one last chance to review the results. I would share those with you in advance and we would have an opportunity in that time frame to redraft the language around explaining how we came up with this and how we're categorizing them. So you'd have another shot at looking at the letter. How doable, reasonable is that for everybody? Any problems? Okay.
Nope.
All right. We have a plan.
Well, Catherine, Andrea put in the chat, which I think it's worth bringing up. She's sort of asking who's actually doing the lumping. She said you and me, but I'm not sure if that's what you were thinking, or you wanted to ask the drafting group or ask if there are others on the subcommittee who wanted to help in that effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think you did such a good job kind of queuing this all up for us, but just definitely wanted to open up to see if anybody else was interested in helping narrow it down and lump it. I can't do it
Uh,
today,
and-
so I'm out.
In terms of organizing to the legislature, I'd certainly be willing to take a look at it and make suggestions.
Great, great. And Paula, are you volunteering?
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to help. And I'm also wondering, as a process question, like, would people be interested in seeing like multiple options? Like, okay, we could lump it like this, we could lump it like this, we could lump it like this. So once we, we actually know what the recommendations are going to be, we could have various ideas of, how to categorize them.
No, Paula, I don't think we have time, and I trust your judgment in terms of drafting, given the
Great.
job you did on this letter.
Sorry, can you remind Catherine, so if we're having a group of folks that are gonna help sort of lump the priority recommendations or those that got the highest votes, what's the time frame that we would want to have that out by? Because we've had a bunch of volunteers, which is great, but also hard to schedule folks to get together.
And we may not need to get together. We may be able to do it via email. So maybe Marion, you and I could take the first shot and then share it with Paula and David. And they could take a look at it Monday. By, if we could come up with something today and they could take a look at it on Monday.
Yep, will do.
I might
And
have to, I can't help today. So that's why I was sort of asking time frame, because I'm out. I have something else I have to prioritize today.
I can
Well,
take a
eh,
shot.
Close
Sure.
of business on Monday? So that you could do it on Monday, Marion? That's a question.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
time frame seems more reasonable to me, and then we would just, as a committee, need to take a couple of days. We just want to try to get this more narrowed down by when, so that the letter can be written to reflect that by Friday. Is that what we're aiming for ultimately?
Yep.
That is tight.
Yep. Got a week.
So if we can commit to getting this done by Monday afternoon, and we all review it by Wednesday afternoon, the latest, and then that gives Paula a day to get it back to us, and we'll just have to look at it as we're meeting on Friday, or we can bump that up a little bit, but.
Right. So the first lumping is really just for the ranking exercise. And I think
Yeah.
the second lumping is for the letter, right? We may, after we get the results of that, we may want to reorganize it yet again.
Yeah.
So the lumping for the ranking exercise, I can at least get started on today and folks can look at it and I can get that set up and ready to send out to you. And then, you guys can look at it on Monday, see if you're comfortable with it and make some suggestions. And then we can get that out. Maybe we can get it out by the close of business Monday, the ranking, so that you guys have a couple days to look at it and think about
Does
it.
a couple of days give enough time to kind of rework it after we prioritize and write a letter, or do we have to commit to a 24-hour turnaround for the ranking? It should be pretty easy to rank once they're lumped, I think.
Well, folks, we can do 24 hours. That would be great. That gives us a little more time for the letter drafting too. All right. Well, we'll try the 24-hour then. So we'll go out Monday, respond by end of business Tuesday or very early Wednesday morning. And then that'll give us Wednesday and Thursday to get stuff ready for our meeting on Friday. And we'll send out an invite for Friday at 9. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. I might not be able to make that, but that's okay. Something else gets scheduled in between. I didn't put up, I guess. That's okay. Not everyone's going to be able to be at everyone.
All right. So I think that closes out everything we needed to cover today. Is there any other formal issue we need to take up before we let you go?
I just we should just make sure that folks can make next week at 9 on Friday. So I think if we're looking to make a decision on sort of moving forward a letter to the council, we are going to need quorum.
Yeah, Bronwyn's in the same meeting that I'm in, so I'm not sure.
Bronwyn's just staff support she's not a subcommittee member.
Oh, okay.
So it's myself, Paula, Alice, and Andrea, David, Peter, Eric, Val are the folks who are on this call.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I can. I put it in my calendar.
And so she's good.
You're
Anybody-
asking about Friday, Mary?
Friday,
Yeah, Friday,
Yeah,
it sounds like
no,
Friday
it's
is at 9.
it's fine by me.
I have a conflict, but I could step out for, like, if we,
we lost you there, Val, but it sounded like you might be able to join for part of it. I think we lost you. Yeah, good. Thanks. See your chat.
I was gonna say it's in chat.
All right. Well, it does sound like that's at least doable for most folks except Andrea. So let's try to move forward with that. Thanks all. Great work. This was
Yeah.
a big task in a short period of time. So really appreciate everybody pitching in. Okay. And have a
Thank
great
you.
thank you,
See you. Have a good weekend.
great work.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye.